Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity has been out for about 6 months now, and E3 is right around the corner. I think it's about time to put this subject to bed. I'm Cornelius Belmont, and let's talk about why Age of Calamity is canon. Thank you for watching the episode. These videos take a lot of time to create, so if you enjoy the content, please leave a like. And if you want to help the channel grow, a subscription is always welcomed. A special thank you goes out to Tim D. Mann, who has given me permission to use some of his music in my episodes. Thanks again. With that out of the way, let's dig in. Today's topic is a lengthy one, but I want to start off by talking about the biggest issue that I think rubbed the fans the wrong way: Nintendo's big lie. If you are in the Zelda community, you are surely aware of the divisive nature of this entry. It's a game that took the world of Breath of the Wild and promised to give us a story about the past of the game 100 years earlier during the Calamity. What we got, however, was a side story about a miniature guardian whose time travel adventure gives us a drastically different outcome than what we would see in Breath of the Wild. There were some pretty raw feelings in the community about this, and continue to be so. Phrases like false advertising were thrown around, and yet despite not being the game that was promised, it is still a good game. More importantly, there are events in the game that are canon to the timeline of Breath of the Wild, not just to itself, and so it is foolish to write out the game entirely solely based on it being a Hyrule Warriors title. Any one person's bias against Dynasty Warriors style gameplay is not enough to invalidate this game. This game also includes some details that may be directly related to the Breath of the Wild sequel. This whole situation with the advertising is pretty shameful, and I absolutely do not blame anybody for being upset with Nintendo and shunning the game for what they pulled here. If you are not aware, in the months leading up to its release, Nintendo promoted the game as being the story of the events 100 years before Breath of the Wild. In other words, they were directly playing on the expectations of their fans to give a fleshed-out, detailed account during the time of the memories that we see in-game.
I think you are now ready to hear what happened 100 years ago.
This game takes place 100 years before the events of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. In that game, the Great Calamity that occurred 100 years prior was mentioned, but the actual event itself wasn't shown in full. In this game, you'll be able to experience the events of the Great Calamity.
Had they gone through with this, they would have been setting themselves up for a very tragic story, as we are all aware of the fate of Hyrule that leads to its post-apocalyptic state. I imagine the concept of Age of Calamity, where you play through the true events of the past, sounded good on paper, but then they realized that you would be playing into the depths of many of the main characters. This may have prompted changes to the story to make things less tragic, but subsequently made it incompatible with Breath of the Wild. Thus, a time travel story was invented. The thing is, the people who were excited about Age of Calamity, well, they knew what they were signing up for. They wanted an unapologetically tragic game where the champions die in service of their kingdom. There was really no need to change the story to something that would be more happy. And so the divisive choice was made to immediately shove Terraco through a time portal. That way, all of their interactions would affect an alternate history. That choice really got under people's skin, mine included. Consider this though, if they ended up changing the story concept of the game to be more happy, and marketed it with that knowledge out there, do you think the game would have sold well? Imagine the promotion saying, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, experience the events of 100 years earlier in an alternate timeline. I'm not saying that it's good that they lied to us, but it is very much the case that if they had been upfront with the alternate timeline, they would have lost a lot of sales to hardcore Zelda fans, especially those like me who were only willing to accept a Dynasty Warrior style game because of its story connection to Breath of the Wild. Throughout the entire game, there are very few events that take place during the timeline of Breath of the Wild, so if it is your intent to write off the game entirely only caring about those moments, well, I'm going to cover those now. I do want to stress though, that there are parts of Age of Calamity where further details about the Breath of the Wild timeline can be inferred, and in doing so, better flesh out the game. There is no guarantee that Nintendo will be paying this close of attention to it, but the developers of Breath of the Wild did work with the Age of Calamity team when developing the story. The first really big part of Age of Calamity that is canon to Breath of the Wild is the very start of the game. It opens showing the Battle of Hateno Field, where Link falls and Zelda's power awakens. At the moment of awakening, as her power echoes across the land, it causes Terrako to awaken in Zelda's study. Apparently, this is where the king ended up storing them. They awaken hearing Zelda's will. I must protect everyone. And using the divine power it just absorbed from Zelda, opens a time portal. Side note, the song that Terrako plays here is not the Song of Time. Some people think it is, but it's actually the start of the Hyrule Warriors melody we hear countless times throughout the game. Anyhow, after opening the gate, Terrako jumps through with some debris following him while evading a blast from a guardian. The malice from that guardian then separates from it and chases Terrako through the portal. Presumably, the portal closed shortly afterwards. The second instance that exists in the Breath of the Wild timeline is some backstory on Princess Zelda. Towards the end of Age of Calamity, we get a cutscene where Zelda is building Terrako as a young child, under the supervision of her mother. Then we get a scene shortly later, after the Queen's death, where Terrako is being taken away from Zelda by the king. The king views them as a toy, and a distraction for Princess Zelda away from her duties of awakening her sealing power, as he is concerned about her failing to do so with the passing of her mother. These are the only scenes in Age of Calamity that definitively happen in the Breath of the Wild timeline. That is, unless some upcoming DLC adds more. Some of you may have noticed that in both of these cases, these events happen before the interference of time travel, which is important because as soon as time travel is introduced, events differ and the timeline splits. This is actually clearly spelt out in-game in one of the loading screen messages. Based on where I'm going with this, I need to bring up that the malice that followed Terrako into the past possessed the Terrako of the past becoming the Harbinger, while the time-traveling Terrako fell into Hyrule Field going dormant. That leads me to... Most theories of time travel are rooted in what we philosophers call hard determinism. This is a fundamental belief that time flows in a complex series of cause and effect, where the outcome of events are determined by previous ones in an infinitely long sequence. As such, effectively the past, present, and future are already set, with ultimately free will being an illusion. This concept of time travel involves entities beyond the limited scope of variables in play, coming in and making changes to those variables, and those changes then ripple their way through the cycle of cause and effect. This is commonly known as the butterfly effect. We see this represented in media well enough, most famously in Back to the Future 2, the butterfly effect, and even Avengers Endgame. This same logic is the same thing that we see taking place in the infamous time split in the Zelda timeline, where Princess Zelda sent Link back to his previous time using her temporal powers and the Ocarina of Time. So in regards to how Terrako is time traveling, it is all consistent with what we have previously seen in the series. Astor is worth bringing up here. because as a seer, he is capable of seeing the future. He very clearly believes that the future is set in stone and is completely devoted to this concept of fate. When he finds out about a time traveler coming from a bad future and attempting to change the outcome, he realizes that things are no longer on the same track and attempts to redouble his efforts to ensure that the calamity is successful. It is unknown if Astor was always evil, or if the version that we see of him in Age of Calamity has been corrupted by the Harbinger. A case could be made either way, but I tend to lean in the direction that he was always trying to help the calamity, and that he purposely fed information to the royal family that would cause them to dig up the ancient Chica technology, and maybe even had a hand in the death of the queen. I'm not sure that Nintendo actually cares to flesh out these details, but there is some DLC on the way. Now, let's move on to some of the big arguments I hear regarding Age of Calamity, where people often try to outright dismiss it. The thing a lot of people seem to overlook when they bring this up is that we don't exactly know how far back in time Terraco jumped with their portal. Generally, people seem to assume that it was around the time of the first mission of the game. If that were the case, then they would absolutely be correct that the events of Age of Calamity, as well as the events leading up to it, are absolutely wrong. If, however, Terraco jumped back in time 10 years, perhaps to around the time he was put into storage, then that means that the Harbinger would have been created around that time. And as a result, that gives all the leadway they need to explain away differences in the story. Furthermore, it makes the most sense for Terraco to want to jump to that point in time, as that is the point where Zelda would most need their help. Let me highlight a few of these problems, and then I will show how they are actually fixed if we adjust how far back Terraco's portal sent them. Creating a champion does indeed lay out that Link found the Master Sword well before the memories we see in Breath of the Wild. Furthermore, we can clearly see how the champions in the memories, Rivali in particular, are aware that Link already has the sword and has been made into Zelda's personal knight. My fellow YouTuber Monster Mace came up with a similar thought process to me to explain this one, and so I will link to his video below. More or less though, the idea is that Breath of the Wild Link was training near the Korok Forest at the military camp, and one knight was drawn to the sword. After pulling it, he was taken to the king, who then recognized him as the hero. In Age of Calamity, however, due to the increase in monster activity and direct assaults against various settlements, Link and many new recruits skipped training at the camp and were stationed wherever they were needed, likely in Hyrule Field. As such, Link never had the opportunity to find the sword until the events in Age of Calamity, where he accompanied Zelda and the other champions to the forest. Simply put, the order is actually not wrong at all. I blame this misconception on people not paying attention to the Ballad of the Champions DLC, where we get memories of Zelda recruiting each of the champions. In addition to those memories, each of the champions' journals becomes available, which further flushes out the timeline of events. The order of their recruitment can then be derived from context. Mipha is first, who asks who all the other champions are. Next is Daruk, as Link is known as the most accomplished knight in Hyrule. Daruk's journal mentions his first encounter with Link, and that he was wielding a sword, but it is unclear if it was the Master Sword or just a normal one. Next up is Rivali, who explicitly mentions that Link has the Master Sword. Up to this point, I believe that Zelda is 15 years old, with her 16th birthday fast approaching. Urbosa is last, as she states that it has been 10 years since the death of the Queen, placing Zelda's age at 16 now. This same order is repeated in Age of Calamity, And honestly, this order makes the most sense from a travel perspective. The big difference that we see in Age of Calamity are that first, Link is now traveling with Zelda along with Impa. Second, that each settlement is on high alert due to monsters attacking them and generally causing problems. These actions are of course a direct result of Astor and the Yiga clan. It is worth noting that the knowledge of the future that Astor has is coming from the Harbinger, who is showing the outcome of the fall of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild. His entire goal seems to be stopping Zelda from awakening her sealing powers, either by killing her or disrupting her progress as much as possible. Similar to the last one, this doesn't actually happen. The Calamity awakens on her 17th birthday, just like it did in Breath of the Wild. But this time it happened at sunrise instead of sunset. I can understand the confusion from people about this one, as I thought that it awakened potentially months earlier based on the cutscenes. While the difference of morning to night is indeed a difference in time, and technically it came about a little bit earlier, it isn't drastically earlier that most people seem to think it is. If you pay close enough attention to the characters' shadows in the cutscenes, as well as the direction of the sunlight, you can tell that this is happening in the morning as Zelda is leaving the castle for Mount Lanayru. At this point, the champions are moving into position with their divine beast, expecting the Calamity to emerge later in the day just as was recorded in Terraco's memory. And so, this is why they are not accompanying Zelda to Mount Lanayru. The short answer is, not much. Age of Calamity introduces elements into the story that could be relevant, but they are only background details that would exist in both timelines. Another really big one that Age of Calamity inserts into the Breath of the Wild story is the existence of Astor. Though we know virtually nothing about him, clearly he never got corrupted by a miniature guardian, and maybe wasn't even evil at all. Age of Calamity creates Astor as a character and then dictates that he existed in Breath of the Wild, even if he never had an active role. With all that being said, and given that this video has already broken 15 minutes, I am going to make the next part of this topic its own video, focusing on the consequences of Age of Calamity. For now, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Age of Calamity launched on the premise that it would portray the events of the Calamity as seen in Breath of the Wild. Nintendo pushed this knowing that the events of Age of Calamity involved time travel, and that it created a timeline split where the events ultimately do not affect Breath of the Wild in any way. They did this to either distort the expectations of the game for better sales, to change the story to be less depressing, or some combination of the two. The end result is that many fans felt outright deceived, further hurting Nintendo's trust with the community. Outside of the very start of the game, and a memory gained late game, none of the events in Age of Calamity exist in the base timeline of Breath of the Wild. Age of Calamity, however, does remain consistent with time travel logic we see in the series, and elements of its story would exist in the timeline of Breath of the Wild, though with different effects. This includes the existence of Astor, who was likely the fortune teller who told the king about the impending calamity, though it is unclear if that version of Astor was an agent of the calamity or not. Because Terraco traveled back in time, they created a time split with drastically different events. These differences are due to some malice following him and corrupting his past incarnation, which would result in the creation of the Harbinger. While Terraco went dormant in a field for about 9 years, the Harbinger was free to start setting up the Calamity's return with knowledge of its victory from Breath of the Wild. It is this interference that fundamentally sets up the differences we see between the past of Breath of the Wild and the events in Age of Calamity. These events include why Link got the sword later in life, the delays in travel due to constant monster attacks, and the emergence of the Calamity slightly earlier on the same day at Hyrule Castle. In the next video, I'm going to be talking about the consequences of Age of Calamity, specifically how its events impact the future champions we see towards the end of the game. And most importantly, if any of these things will actually affect Breath of the Wild 2. I wanted to end by saying that I reached out to my fellow creator Thinkafurr for his thoughts on this theory, as he has a great understanding of time travel logic. I mainly wanted to bounce my ideas off of him to make sure that my logic wasn't too crazy, and he generally agrees with me about my points. While this isn't exactly a collaboration with him, it was great to work with him, and I encourage you to check out his channel. His input will also be influencing next week's episode, so see you then. Thank you guys for watching the episode. For the time being, I'm going to continue to focus on Zelda theories, but I'm beginning to plan out some Square Enix related theories for the future. If you enjoy my content, please give the video a like and subscribe. That would really mean a lot to me, and it helps the channel grow. See you next time. This is Cornelius Belmont signing out.